So, the weather modelling has happened. All that data has been loaded into our EnergyMetric platform, and now it's ready for policymakers and planners to create scenarios and try and plan their renewable futures. So, you are looking here at the island of Mauritius. I'm creating a scenario for the island of Mauritius, and you can see we have a map interface. And on the map interface, there's a background map. I'm going to turn that to black and white just to make things a little clearer. So you will see now that we have got some markers on the map. There are some orange markers, and if we zoom in a bit, you'll see there's a green marker up there. And those markers are representing existing renewable energy installations. The oranges are solar PV installations, and the green one is a wind farm. And we can check this if we like. We can change our base map to a satellite view, and if we zoom our way in to one of these markers, you will see next to the La Ferme Reservoir there is a PV farm, which I think is called Saraco, quite a large one by island standards. So we've pre-located and preloaded these in, but we're representing that solar farm as a single pin on the map. We can also represent it as a polygon, but it doesn't make too much difference. Remember, we're modelling at a 1 kilometre by 1 kilometre resolution, so we just want to get the location approximately correct. But what we do want to make sure is that we have the right sort of spread and spatial distribution of generation facilities. Basically, because that is going to be taken into account in our modelling. So if there's a correlation between strong winds on one side of the island and weaker winds on the other, and if there's a correlation between solar and wind, we do reflect that in our modelling at this 1 kilometre by 1 kilometre resolution. So these are the existing installations. We can also add other GIS layers to this. So I'll just add on the transmission network, for example. So you can now see that in red. And nature reserves. So these are the sort of things that we want to see when we're planning. So we want to avoid the nature reserves. Although I have to say that wind farm there, the Quadrangle wind farm, is right in the middle of one. But there will be different local rules and regulations about where you can and cannot place things, and of course your proximity to the grid is quite important, because you don't want to be too far away from that, because that's a costly thing to link up to. So there are various GIS layers probably that will be relevant to our planning exercise, and we can overlay them on here when we're looking at our map, and we can also show you our resource maps. So we have created from that weather modelling exercise that we were talking about in the previous video, we can overlay a resource map that we've created from that. This is at the 1 kilometre by 1 kilometre resolution. If I just take off the network, now you can see it. You can see that there is an area in the middle of the island where it's high ground, slightly mountainous. You do tend to get a lot of clouds, so you get less yield for solar in the middle of the island and more yield towards the outskirts. And we can also look at the wind distribution, again from our wind modelling process. Come back. What am I doing? There we go. So there's the wind. So in all of our resource maps, darker colours represent greater resource and lighter colours represent less resource. So in the wind, you do get some high points of wind across these mountains in the middle, but they're not necessarily a good place to put a wind farm because it's quite mountainous. So resource is obviously an important characteristic. Proximity to the grid is an important characteristic. And local constraints, planning laws, who owns the land, where people live, all these things have got to be taken into account. So having done all this, we let's maybe take the resource maps off for a second. we're not really interested in the here and now, we're interested in the future. So let's say that the island of Mauritius has a target to increase its proportion of renewables. We need to add some more generators into this scenario. So we come to add installation, and we have a number of different types of generator that we can add. Let's add some utility solar. So if I click on utility solar, I now get presented with a request for information. Tell me about this utility solar installation. There are quite a few bits of information that we need to fully specify a generator, so we have some templates set up so you can pre-populate a lot of this information. So I'm going to choose utility solar polycrystalline, and that will populate all my boxes here with a standard description for polycrystalline solar PV. But you can change any of these values. Obviously we might want to change the capacity, 1,000 kilowatts, maybe we want, let's say 2,000. So 2,000 kilowatts, 2 megawatt solar farm, that's about 5,700 panels. We have an inverter. The inverter has a capacity which may be equal to the panels or maybe not, depending on what we want to do. But let's leave it as it is. We also specify a loss factor to account for things like grid losses, local shading, and a number of other factors. You can do more detailed modelling about that, and other packages will do quite a lot of modelling of different loss factors. But we are at the planning stage, pre-feasibility, at the resource assessment stage of the life cycle, so a single factor generally works for us. The power that we get from the installation will degrade as it gets older, so we have a power degradation factor here. We can also specify the inclination and orientation of our panels, and then various coefficients that we will use to generate the power output, generally related to temperature. So those are our technical characteristics. As I say, this is one way of modelling a solar farm at a high level, at the pre-feasibility stage. Then we also have some financial characteristics, and we've provided some suggestions, but we always ask the planner and the policymaker to replace with local knowledge if they've got it. So there's the installation cost, the variable and fixed O&M costs if there are any. Is there a residual value at its end of life? And then the same for the inverter, and the inverter has its own characteristics and costs, capex costs and O&M costs, and it has its own lifetime as well, because in our tropical locations inverters don't last as long as the manufacturers say they do. So frequent replacement of inverters is often needed. So there we go, we've specified the financial characteristics. There are some other general fields here, but I won't bother with those for now. So let's decide we want to place them on the map. We can confirm. Let's place this one as a marker. I'm just going to randomly choose to put it there. And confirm that's my location. And I've now added our 2 megawatt solar farm to our scenario. And we can do the same thing for wind. So if I go and click on wind here, I can select a template. There are a number of standard specifications in here. I'll just go for a 2.3 megawatt onshore wind turbine specification. If I add that to my scenario, and I'll choose a capacity, how many turbines do we want here? Let's say we'll have 5 turbines. There we go, 5 turbines, that's 11.5 megawatts. Obviously, if you're working in this country, or in Europe, or in the States, or in South Africa, the wind farms will be quite a lot bigger, and the solar farms will be quite a lot bigger as well. But in our island context, these are typical capacity values. So they are small, relatively small installations on a global scale. So that's our 11.5 megawatt wind installation. There are some characteristics, again, losses. There is some physical features like the hub height, the rotor diameter, and we have loaded up from a manufacturer's specification a wind power curve, which I assume you're familiar with. The wind power curve tells you how much energy you get at a given wind speed. There's generally a cut-in, so if the wind is below a certain level, you don't get any power, and then it ramps up to a maximum at another threshold, and then it stays at that maximum output until you reach a cutout where it has to be switched off so it doesn't get damaged. So this is a typical wind power curve, and this is from the manufacturer specification. And our means of modelling wind is basically based around modelling this wind power curve. So what winds do we expect? How much power are we going to get? Again, there are much more complex and in-depth ways of modelling that, taking into account park effects, but at our pre-feasibility and planning stage, we're not too concerned with those features. So let's place our wind farm. Just to show you, I'll place this as a polygon. Let's go and place it out in the ocean somewhere. Here we go. So points or polygons, it doesn't really matter. There's a polygon representing our extent of our wind farm. We can confirm that now. And now let's say we're ready to go. So we've added to our installation down here an installation number 13, which is the wind farm, and an installation 12, which is the solar farm, and we're good to go. So what we would now do is we would go to the Run Scenario button, and there may be several weather data sets that are available for Mauritius, but we try to automatically choose the best one in terms of resolution and extent that fits your scenario, and we'll offer that, but you can choose others if you wish, but let's just accept the default, and we click on Run Scenario, and off it goes. So what is happening now is that scenario is submitted to our servers, and that scenario is being simulated against the weather data that we described in the previous video. And one of the key things that we do, which we think is pretty unique, is we put a lot of effort into modelling the uncertainties, the probabilities, and the correlations. So we do quite a lot of statistics. That does mean that it takes a bit of a while to process. You can go and create another scenario in here if you like whilst you're doing that. We will tell you when your results are ready, but for time I will stop the video now, and we'll come back and we'll have a look at some results. So that's setting up a scenario in EnergyMetric. Thanks.